Right, so the Prevent programme, the Labour set-up organisation, Tony Blair era agency designed to prevent, as the name implies, radicalisation of our citizens by harmful ideologies, ideologies as they deem harmful, has produced a document in line with the Tories' decision to effectively widen what they deem to be extremism in this country, what is regarded as radicalisation, in a blatant bid to actually shut down opposing political views now, effectively lumping them in as just as much of a threat to British society as a sort of grooming we saw by the likes of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. By widening the scope of what is deemed extremist in the way they are, whether you agree with these ideologies or not, and we're talking about such things as socialism or communism or anti-abortionism here, then it all starts to look more like a clampdown on opposing views to that of the narrow Thatcherite establishment views, and for entities built on, for example, socialism, like the NHS or the trade union movement, where might it leave them? Prevent has always been skirting the lines of shutting down freedom of speech and freedom of expression. It has always disproportionately affected ethnic minority groups, so is an inherently racist body. But far from the Tories being potentially the biggest arbiters of this, Labour, if they get into government come the next general election, could be far worse. Because despite a key Labour figure's recent glaring admission, Zionism isn't getting added to Prevent's list of banned thought. Right, so I've been meaning to do a proper piece on Prevent for a while. It came up briefly in my coverage of the Rochdale by-election since Labour's candidate, Azhar Ali, whether Labour still claim him as theirs or not, he was Labour on the ballot and he kept campaigning, was a former advisor to Tony Blair on Prevent. It's a Labour creation. It's getting widened in what amounts to an abuse on civil liberties if the Tories act on Prevent's latest documentation, the report done on it, and Labour are hardly likely to reverse this either. They may even be worse, with both main parties certainly to leave something that should, in my opinion, on the list off of it. I'll come on to that in a moment, though, because the attitude of people and communities most affected by the Prevent programme, I think, is actually more important than what Prevent purports to, as the name suggests, prevent, that being anti-terrorism, because it is top-down diktat from government, in effect, on that issue. The effects on said communities, highlighting major concerns over issues such as religious and gender segregation. It talks down to them, it imposes their will on them, it doesn't involve them. All in the name of, we're told, of course, keeping the people of this country safe. But for the last 2 decades the Prevent has been in existence for, it hasn't done that. It has suppressed identities in the name of keeping people safe. It has become the new no blacks, no Irish, no dogs mentality, just given the cover of government backing and legislation. There's a brilliant film by Somoza Media, which they made in conjunction with East London University, called Prevent Film, A Conversation, which does a deep dive into Prevent. This was made back in 2018, so was done in the wake of the London attacks on Westminster and the Manchester Arena bombing. It's on thesomoza.co.uk. I'll provide a link to it as well. But it is very much examining how the Prevent strategy is hazardous to those it affects. It isn't long, it's under 18 minutes long, but it's well worth your time for what it packs in. Part of the description reading, the film, the Prevent programme, A Conversation, highlights a range of views on the Prevent anti-terrorism strategy, touching on issues such as extremism, gender equality, terrorism, Islamophobia, UK foreign policy, Palestine, and freedom of speech. It affects all of this and more. Filmmaker and Samosa co-founder Anwar Akhtar features in the film, and he said, racism in Britain has been given a green light to recircuit itself and converging on Muslims. It's okay to hate Muslims. Everyone can join in the Muslim-hating bandwagon, and some of it is linked to the Prevent programme. Relevant to very much the goings-on of today, Mr. Akhtar went on to say later in the film, I think one of the earliest own goals and huge mistakes, and the kind of reputational damage it did was immense, was when some bright spark thought it was a good idea to try and use the Prevent programme to shut down Palestinian activism and Palestinian support. And the argument they were trying to develop was that empathy, support, activism for the Palestinians might be a sign of radicalisation, or extremism, or support for religious hatred. So it's nonsense, rubbish. This is the inherent danger such a system as Prevent represents, because those overseeing it are not impartial themselves, and therefore such a program is easily weaponized in the name of keeping everyone safe, but going along certain political lines, and certainly at the expense of people of certain religions or certain political persuasions. Although the film doesn't skirt around the fact there are radicalised Muslims, they are the very small and hopefully diminishing minority, and certainly radicalisation is not confined to Islam. Prevent has scapegoated Muslim communities. This is continuing to this day, and that last statement by Anwar Akhtar that I shared there really does have a bearing on where we are at today, with pro-Palestine marches, numerous ones going on today, demonstrations, support for Palestine, and massive criticism of Israel being shown where it never has been able to gain mass traction before. Because, of course, we're seeing the atrocities in Gaza unfold on social media on a daily basis. The reputation of Prevent has always been poor. Even the police admit the relationship with the public and Prevent is a fragile one. Fragile being a bit of a generous term, but Prevent has never really formed a significant part in the daily lives and ongoing thinking of most people in this country. And as much as I could do a lengthy video on Prevent all on my own, for one, I'm white, and my white privilege doesn't make me best placed, I don't think, to do so. And besides, Samosa Films have done a far better job than I could, and I do absolutely recommend watching what they've done with interest as Prevent comes back into the news now. Again, for no good reason, as the government now wish to expand it, and how they want to expand it. Well, as a rotten lefty myself, as regular viewers will know, that in and of itself might now place me in a spot of bother going forward, and others like me, as the Tories now want Prevent to include socialism as an extremist ideology, wanting renationalised public services, wanting investment in our country and all the aspects of our lives that directly affect us, being able to protest for a just cause. Organisers and spokespeople on such things might, under Prevent, now face being taken to task themselves for radicalising others, or that accusation being levied against them. Opposing inequality would apparently become extremist. The human rights advocacy group Rights and Security International have weighed in on this, saying, "For years we have expressed concern about how the government's broad concept of extremism could be open to politicised abuses. It appears that this concern has now been realised through a blatant distinction between how the government wants to treat people on the left versus people on the right under Prevent. Our concern is only heightened by government rhetoric during the past few days that appears to be targeting British Muslims and protesters for Palestinian rights. If extremism can mean anything the government wants it to mean, that's a clear problem for democracy." Absolutely right. And it should terrify us all that they could decide anything they don't like is therefore extremist and therefore bad for the public, and therefore if you carry on spreading such lines and such narratives and such ideas, then you'd be an extremist. It is absolutely government abuse of the Prevent programme. Where will that end? Preventing anything that the government of the day doesn't like, as they remain eternally right-wing, narrow-minded, and no matter who is in power, nothing ever changes? Well, we're looking at that already. There's no difference between the Tories and Labour, but these expansions to Prevent would attempt to lock that in. The report into expanding Prevent looks at socialism and communism and labels both as united by a set of grievance narratives which underline their cause. The grievance being, we don't like how the country's run, we want change, and that's enough in and of itself to warrant being called an extremist. And to Prevent, of course, anyone in a position of responsibility is required to report any sign of radicalisation under the terms of the programme to Prevent. Will a student, for example, walking through a university campus singing, "Oh, Jeremy Corbyn," be a sign of radicalisation now then? That's essentially where we're at, isn't it? Because this move is a blatant move to shut down political debate and representation by a programme already on its backside, as far as trusted it goes. But even more dangerous than what the government want to see included under the terms of Prevent as extremism is what they will ignore. Because if you want to talk about radicalisation, particularly of the most vulnerable young minds still being shaped, then you need to watch this.
In my current job, and every time is hugely moving and very enjoyable for me. But so 2005, I get invited, and I turn around to Jeremy Newmark, who I think was already working for the JLC then, but it was his exact same generation of me in student politics. He had been running UJS when I've been running Labour Students. I was like, why didn't you take me then? Why didn't UJS take me? They were always taking groups of student leaders on study tours to Israel. And why? I was like, why did I have to wait till 2005 until 12 years after I graduated? And Jeremy was like, well, when we put together the list of who to take, you were so outrageously pro-Zionist that we thought it was a total waste of our money to bother taking you to Israel. Because the idea was to get people on side that were not already on side. So that was why it took me rather a long time to get there.
That, in case you didn't know, is Labour NEC member and director of the Israel lobbyist group We Believe in Israel, Luke Akehurst, talking about how beautiful it is every time he goes on a Zionist jolly to Israel, talking about university leader study groups being taken to Israel by the Jewish Leadership Council, and admitting that he wasn't taken as a student, only going so many years later because he was already outrageously Zionist, and it would have been a waste of their money. So the reason for these student trips to Israel is to basically radicalise students then for Israel's own interests. Did you notice when Luke Akehurst nearly said convert them? He did just correct himself in time, but I picked it up, did you? Now, Akehurst was finally taken in 2005, he said, well after he had graduated 10 or 12 years later. So this radicalisation by Zionism has been going on for decades then. And you wonder why so many people who have got themselves into positions of power in the years since are so overtly pro-Israel. Is this not the very definition of radicalisation, especially in light of what we are all witnessing now, what Israel is doing in Gaza now, and has been across the occupied Palestinian territories for decades, and most importantly, why it thinks it can get away with it using that self-defence narrative all the time? Why do so many politicians and organisational leaders still, even now, back Israel in spite of public opinion? Is the dangers prevent warn of not already being shown as a result of radicalisation of the generation now in charge, though of course those responsible are being kept out of prevent's remit by people, perhaps, possibly, you look across our political spectrum now at all the people who have got pro-Israel links or have been heavily lobbied by the Israel lobby, are they not the very people that Prevent are supposed to be picking up? Akehurst is Labour, not Tory, and all of this expansion is being done by the Tories. It's okay to say that. But they'll probably accuse Keir Starmer of being a lefty extremist. Oh, how those of us who are actually left would laugh at such things, laugh at their desperation, frankly, if they went there. But Starmer as Prime Minister, with oversight for this himself at that point, could well be worse. Everything being done for the Israel lobby now, and that has been done within the Labour Party in the name of clamping down on anti-Semitism, how it has been weaponised. Well, under Starmer, under Prevent, well, that could be rolled out as law across the country. He could be even worse with Prevent than the Tories are now. I firmly believe he's far more authoritarian than Rishi Sunak is, and is utterly bought and paid for by the Israel lobby. He owes far more to them. They'll much prefer him to Sunak, and Sunak is completely acquiescent to them already by his actions regarding Israel. Prevent has been a blunt racist instrument for some time, with its remit potentially to expand, and as selectively as that is looking, the blunt club that it has always been is going to be hitting a lot more people in a lot more communities, with accusations of extremism where there is none, whilst excusing where it very much is coming from. A lot more people need to get a lot more clued up about the Prevent programme, because it could be coming for a lot more of us before much longer. One example of something it could be becoming more extremist to criticise is the recent invasion by settlers into the north of the Gaza Strip. Did you not hear about that one? Can't imagine why. Get all the details of this on this video recommendation here, and I'll hope to catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.